Hey guys,
We're rolling in to bring you another broadcast.
I'm Ari.
And I'm Megan.
The first segment we're going to cover this week is the poll by Ramsey and Carter.
What animal do you think is the meanest, Ari?
Probably the cat, more specifically your cat.
Capuchin monkey.
I think a squirrel. You might think squirrels are cute and fuzzy. They have the big fuzzy tails and the cute eyes when they look at you, but they're mean. Did you ever try to approach a squirrel? They have big teeth, and if they could talk, they would tell you something, because they're just worried about getting it on with each other, having a good time, getting food. They have survival instincts, and they are mean, and they would tell you so.
People. Feminist woman.
You're good. Because
Ponds is looking kind of
what's that animal that doesn't care about anything? The honey badger? That one. That's the one that would be it.
I think a camel.
Camel?
Because you know, like old people are always grumpy. And camels walk like very slow and they're that old.
Probably a shark or a lion or something, because they're mean.
I think a cat.
I agree, honestly.
I think a cat. I think a cat would be the meanest. Got them now.
Turkeys that go through my yard would be pretty rude. The wild turkeys. The wild turkeys.
Tiger?
Wow, I guess those animals were really rude. Thanks for your input, guys.
Next, we have David and Carter with competency-based grading.
Hi, I'm Carter Dutton, and this is Dave Williams, the principal at Belmont High School, and today we're going to be asking him questions about competency-based learning. So, what is competency-based grading?
Sure. So the simplest way to put that, competency-based grading really is a practice where as a school we identify exactly what we want kids to know and be able to do, and then we report out specifically on what you know and what you are able to do. And that's a little bit different than a traditional system that reports grades out using some mathematical aggregate. With competency-based education, we describe your standards. Those are the things you need to know and be able to do. You guys have all seen proficiency scales. So we describe the criteria kids need to meet in order to be considered proficient in each of those standards. And then from a teaching perspective, we gather evidence of what you've learned and we measure that evidence against that criteria. And that's really what makes it more accurate.
All right. Is there any specific reason it's coming to Belmont?
The reason it's coming to Belmont, that's a great question. Really, everything that we're doing within the umbrella of competency education represents the most widely accepted and the most profound research in the field of education. That's really why we're doing it. We have two overarching goals. One is to improve achievement for all kids, and number two is to improve the accuracy and the integrity of our grading and reporting system. So the traditional system that we've been using, the one that we've all grown up with, is fundamentally flawed, and it results in grades that are just not as accurate as they should be. So competency education helps us to make those grades more accurate. And one of the main reasons it does that is because what we do is we separate academics from behavior. So now you really have two scores for each course. You have an academic score and then a habit of work score.
What are the benefits of competency-based grading?
I think I alluded to some of them. I mean, really, ultimately, greater gains in student achievements. We want to make sure kids learn more and kids learn to a deeper level. And that's part of the reasons why at this school we're defining our proficiency scales as detailed as we are. The whole idea is that every kid in the building is working towards standards, working towards some learning they haven't met yet, and sort of pushing kids that way. Of course, the other big benefit I mentioned, it also makes our grades far more accurate. So what that allows us to do is put interventions in place for kids that might struggle early on, because we'll have a much better sense of exactly what they've learned, what they haven't learned, and then that allows us to, program for kids much better.
Do you find any flaws in the new grading system?
No grading system is perfect. So, of course there are flaws with it. The big piece that we're struggling with now is just consistency building wide, and especially where last year, and I think it was the second half of last year, was the first time teachers in the building began assessing habits of work. So one of the big things we're working on is just getting more consistent with our practices from a teacher perspective on how they're going to do that. That's really the biggest issue that we have right now.
All right. And how do students earn extra credit for a course at competency-based grading?
Extra credit or credit? So in competency-based grading, there would be no extra credit,
Earn
because
credit,
that would be
yeah.
something that would sort of make the grades less accurate. But how do they earn credit for a course?
Credit for a
And that is a great question. So next year, grades at Belmont High School essentially will not be mathematically calculated at all. Teachers will essentially be gathering evidence about what kids have learned and then communicating that evidence in Empower, which has a student portal that'll be viewable to kids and parents at all times. You could think of that as used very similar to the way teachers are using their grade books now. You know, you'll have assignments and you'll have scores attached to each of those assignments. When teachers are ready, they will take a look at all that evidence, and then they will make a claim using one or more of those proficiency scales on whether or not you're proficient. So you'll have a score on each standard in a course on the 4.0 scale. Those standard scores at the end of a semester will then be averaged. And you'll wind up with a course average for each course, again on a 4.0 scale. In order to pass a course or earn credit, that score needs to be 2.5 or greater, with no standard lower than 2.0.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
So we're getting rid of the mathematical part for grading, pretty much, is what you're trying to tell me. But then we're using the standards that our teacher. So there's proficiency scales, right?
Yeah.
And let's say you have 4 standards for each of the, like you have a proficiency scale for each of those 4 standards.
Okay.
And you get, I don't know, maybe a 3.5 or whatever. Your teacher will take the average of all 4 of those of the standards, and that's your average, like, grade, I guess, per se.
Yeah, that's an important distinction to be made. So from the teacher perspective, there is no math involved at all. So all they're going to do is take a look at the work that you turned in, essentially the body of evidence, and measure that, and ideally measure it with you, measure it with students, against the criteria that's in those proficiency scales. They'll come up with some score, you know, out of 4, right, for each of the standards. That's all teachers will do. Teacher's job is done then. The system will then automatically average those standards. And the averaging piece sometimes can be confusing because, you know, I just mentioned there's no math involved. Of course, that is a mathematical way to arrive at a grade. The difference is this. In order, from the teacher standpoint, there is no math involved. When we average on a 4.0 scale, that's very different than averaging on a 100-point scale, particularly when zeros are factored in, because a 0 winds up being an extreme outlier and has a really profound negative influence on the data set when you use a 0 on a 100-point scale when you're averaging.
All right, and
That's a good question.
I think the final question will be, what happens if a student fails to earn credit for a course?
Yeah, that is a great question, Carter. So, you know, there are times when students will, you know, fail to meet that 2.5 benchmark and not earn credit for the course. As long as they have a score that's greater than 1.75, then students will be able to enter into one or more credit recovery options. So the way that will work is if a student doesn't quite make it at the end of the semester, the teacher will then submit a form that says exactly which standards the student has not made, okay? And then at that point, the student will be scheduled into one or more credit recovery options. So the 2 options that we're going to have that we're going to use most next year, of course, summer school, but next year we are also adding essentially a 7th block class. That will be a class that we're going to offer after school that will be taught by a content area teacher specifically for credit recovery. And the reason right now, you guys know, we have what we call credit or competency recovery courses in the school day. They're not as effective as they ought to be. And part of the reason for that is because a student may be scheduled in there, they may only have 1 or 2 standards to make up. They recover those standards, but then you still have, you know, weeks, if not months of class time. Oftentimes it's very difficult for us to schedule kids with a content area teacher during those times as well. So being able to offer that after school is going to be a great resource for us. And we actually have funding for a late bus as well. So students will, who don't make it, will be scheduled for additional time after school, specifically to recover any standards they haven't met.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Williams.
All right, you're welcome.
In our next segment, Jenny Ramsey and I research teen depression and anxiety.
Depression is a rising concern and issue among teenagers, even in Belmont High School. We sent out an anonymous survey about anxiety and depression to the students of BHS. More than 80 students responded. Here are the results. To the question, do you know anyone that has experienced depression? 95.2% said yes. To the question, have you ever experienced anxiety or depression? 63.6% said they experienced both anxiety and depression. 90.9% have experienced anxiety, and 72.7% have experienced depression. 50.6% of students say seasonal depression has affected them.
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. How can I help? We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure. But sometimes it goes deeper, and it's not going to go away by itself. Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
But don't just let it drop.
So how do you think SAD is helping our student body?
I think SAD is really helping our student body because we send kids every year to go do the Connect training, which is what we just taught basically. And it's like a 5-hour seminar. It's really helpful and it gets more youth involved in what we do, and it also has, like, we have the opportunity to teach, and I think that really brings the message home towards kids a lot more because they're hearing it from kids of their age.
Right. So do you think SAD has helped you?
It's definitely helped me. It's put a lot of things into perspective that I wouldn't realize. Like, I have always been big on mental health, but this made it a lot more, it solidified it more because I learned more throughout it. We do a lot of stuff like interacting with the student body, interacting with people in the community, interacting with everybody. So it really does help.
Thanks. Well, thanks for talking with me.
No problem.
Okay, so I'm here with Mrs. Gagnon, the Student's Assistance Counselor. We're going to ask her a few questions on depression. So, would you say that social media affects the mental health of teenagers today?
So I do think it does, and partially because I feel like kids can never sort of escape if there's banter or if they're feeling like they're being given a hard time. There's always a way that people are going to constantly comment or say things, and you can never really like just remove yourself from it. So I've always been worried about that component, especially when kids already have some underlying issues around depression and their self-esteem is low. I also think that there's a piece of a disconnect. But I think when we're so busy being behind our phones, there's sort of that interpersonal connection that I think we're missing, and I think that's a big part of mental wellness.
What are some unhealthy ways that you think you've seen teenagers trying to deal with this like anxiety or depression they may be feeling?
I feel like young people will put some pictures and things out on social media hoping that's going to get them the attention that they feel like they need to sort of build up their self-esteem, when in fact it probably is not presenting them in the best light, whether it's a scantily clad outfit and trying to put that out on social media to get attention that way, or saying something that might be sort of like not nice about somebody else. This year in particularly, I've not had as many students doing self-harming, but I will have students that will maybe do self-harming behavior in other ways, whether it's like limiting their food or things like that. So even having unhealthy eating can be some self-harming. I also think a lot of students will turn to substances. And I think that right now we have a lot of students that are addicted to nicotine because of vaping, and that creates sort of mood instability. And even though it doesn't look like withdrawal like it does from like alcohol or other substances, it puts you on edge. So I feel like we have more students that maybe are engaging in, whether it's that they go get a little nicotine hit to sort of balance themselves out, or they might engage in some high risk, drug and alcohol participation, or even sexual activity.
So what would you suggest, like healthier ways to deal with that would be?
But I'm a really big believer in doing activities, like outdoor activities. Getting outside alone will automatically make your brain start to release chemicals naturally. Well, seasonal depression happens as a result of there being a deficiency in vitamin D in our body, and that's really important for serotonin and other chemicals of your brain that just stabilize your mood. So I feel like it's really important in the months that we have super short days, especially here in New Hampshire, like it gets dark at 3:45, 3:50 in the wintertime, that people have, they take either supplements of vitamin D, or those are the months that they really have to make sure that they're doing some form of exercise or activity that's going to release it, naturally release some of those chemicals.
That's all I have. Thank you for talking with us.
You're welcome.
And yeah.
Thanks for including me.
Thank you guys for watching.
See you next time.